Apparently, this is the new interior design trend you need to watch. So watch this video. Welcome back to the Paint People. My name is James, and this is Design Style, a new series where we talk about a design style that maybe is off the radar a little bit, but is really, really interesting. And not only that, I'm going to give you a color palette based on this design style at the end of the video so you can start designing your space. Today is all about a variation of minimalism, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. It's the design style that trims a lot of the unnecessary stuff in your home. It essentially is a less is more approach to design. This one is an offshoot of that called white chocolate minimalism. This is a design style that I stumbled upon recently, and I gotta say, it does resonate with me quite a bit. It takes a lot of the things that I appreciate about minimalism and then adds that beautiful, warm, cozy vibe that I always gravitate towards. I've always been a beige over gray kind of guy. I've even sort of explored kind of green undertone colors a little bit more as well. I like being warm and cozy. So this is an offshoot of minimalism that leans into that because the white chocolate element essentially is just adding that creamy quality to everything. So you're not going to see a ton of super stark, pure whites. You might see a little bit, but there's definitely an emphasis on very, very light, creamy colors. So some of the characteristics of white chocolate minimalism is definitely a base of white chocolate. And that's the color that I want to talk about first by Benjamin Moore. This is a color, essentially it's a very light, creamy color. It has a beautiful warmth to it. It is quite bright with an LRV around 87, which means it reflects 87% of the light that hits it. But it does have that bit of yellow that is actually decently apparent. And to some eyes, especially under certain lighting conditions, it can have a touch of green, sort of like a creamy green. Green or green? Which one's your favorite? Let me know down below, or neither. If you are a little concerned about a bit of green coming through, I wouldn't be, because that's what adds some nuance to this whole look. You're not just leaning into light beige and different variations of it. It has that very unique quality that I do appreciate. So if you are starting with that white chocolate base in your entire color palette, there are some things that you need to be considerate of. Wherever possible, you want to make sure that you're adding textural components to your space. That could be in the form of the materials you use, maybe your area rugs, wall decorations. Now, of course, you don't want to go too crazy with your accessories because minimalism is sort of the stripped back approach to everything. So you don't want to bombard the space by layering everything on top of one another. But the pieces that you do have, make sure there's something to them because you're not going to have a huge variation of color. So you might as well add some texture as well. Another tip that I can share is lean into natural materials. You see it everywhere these days. Natural woods, wicker, rattan, wool, cotton, all those types of materials are going to be great. Linen as well. It's just an easy way to add some loveliness into your design, into your whole room, because natural materials just tend to fit with a lot of different paint colors, namely something like white chocolate. And it does lean into that Scandi sort of aesthetic that minimalism can sometimes be compared to. And as a whole, be intentional with where things are, what their purpose is, their functionality. That's another big part of minimalism, even in white chocolate minimalism. You have to make sure that nothing is wasted, nothing is unnecessary. That's a big component of it. Let's get into some more colors. So we have white chocolate, of course, the star of the show. The second color is Swiss coffee. And the two may seem pretty similar. That's because they are. But I think you don't necessarily want to go with a crazy variance in paint colors here. You want to make sure you're picking your colors very, very carefully here. You don't want them to clash and sort of accentuate things that you don't want accentuated. What's nice about Swiss coffee is even though it looks a bit cleaner than white chocolate, to me at least, it's actually darker. It has a hint of gray added in, which gives it a bit more depth. And I feel like it's a more subtle warmth, although it is yellow leaning, just like white chocolate. Maybe a bit less of that sort of green tinge that can show up, but they do have that same type of warmth, which means they will coexist really, really nicely. To be honest, you can use one over the other, but you can also mix these two as well. Just in whatever case, please make sure you're testing your colors out before you commit to painting. Don't make that mistake and assume everything's going to be A-okay. Giving your contractor the A-okay to paint your whole house only to realize, I actually don't know if that color is warm enough or whatever. Just please test your colors. Color number 3 is another white, Mountain Peak white. And I don't normally do this. I like to differentiate things quite a bit, but when we're talking about a design style called white chocolate minimalism, there's going to be a lot of white paint colors involved. Mountain Peak White is the stark white of the bunch. It's as stark and as crisp as I think I would want to go with this sort of color palette. And that's because any cooler and you start to get into blue territory, and that can really throw the whole look off in my mind. Mountain Peak White's great because it does have that slight creaminess in the background, although it's a much brighter white than the other two, especially Swiss Coffee. So in the spaces where you want just a beautiful, clean, blank canvas type of color, maybe you don't necessarily need that warmth, or you have a lot of really warm lighting in there, both from maybe a south-facing exposure, or the light bulbs you use happen to be very incandescent with a kind of amber glow, then maybe you don't want to go too warm with your paint color. Mountain Peak White sort of fills that gap because it's clean, stark, and it'll just feel the most neutral of the bunch. Mountain Peak White, also a great trim color and ceiling option too. If you wanted something as bright as possible that sort of fits the whole scheme, great choice. Now my last two colors, they're not necessarily white, but I would still call them off-white. First one is Lancaster White, and why I love this one is it sort of feels like a deepened version of white chocolate. It has a bit of gray added in. You really start to see that weathered beige, green, gray combination all coming into a really good place. And it just gives you a darker option that still feels light, that still fits under the whole umbrella of this design style. It's not something that I would overwhelm a space with. I still think for your walls, especially in your open areas, you do want to go with those white paint colors we talked about earlier. But for the areas that you don't, and maybe you want something with a bit more depth, this is a great choice. And then another color which has less gray, but even more depth, is Constantino Chardonnay. Hopefully I pronounced that right. Similar to Lancaster White, although you do strip away that gray aspect, you in turn have less of that green as well. And you get this sort of delicate, kind of yellowy gold color, which is very passive, very minimalist, but is actually the darkest color of this bunch. So it could technically be an accent color in this case, but none of these colors are meant to be accents. In fact, it's the accessories, it's the furniture, those important items that you've curated, those become the accents. The walls, they're just hanging out in the background in your clean white chocolate minimalism. Here's the palette altogether. It looks pretty white, doesn't it? But it suits the style. But before you commit to any of these light paint colors, you got to check out this one that we did a review on. I think it's an awesome candidate as well for this style.